OLE, the utopian world of online education.
Hello students, welcome to OLE. This is your biology class where we try and make biology interesting and understandable. So in the last segment of this chapter, we were talking about pre-fertilization events, right? We had talked about gametogenesis and then how pollination is essential for fertilization to occur or to be accomplished, right? Then we had also talked about pollen-pistil interaction, which is a kind of dialogue which happens because of certain chemical components, right? Today we are going to go ahead and discuss about how fertilization occurs in the angiosperms or the flowering plants. It is very interesting to note here that the fertilization in flowering plants is in fact very distinctive, right? ये सिर्फ flowering plants में ही ऐसा होता है, right? So we are going to talk about certain subtopics and then we are going to move on to the interesting kind or distinctive type of fertilization which occurs in the flowering plants. So today we will be discussing about the fertilization events. Alright, so when we go into the subtopics, we are going to pick up as to how the pollen tube enters into the ovule. अब देखो, जब हम लोगों ने last time pollen pistil interaction का discussion किया था, I had told you about how it generally enters into the micropyle. So today we are going to see if it always enters through the micropyle or there can be certain other entry points as well. Alright, after this the pollen tube enters and then the male gametes have to enter. So we will also be talking about the entry of the male gametes and whatever happens to the pollen grain thereafter. And then we will be going ahead with fertilization, जिसमें actually हम लोग दो processes को ध्यान में रखेंगे, which is Syngamy and triple fusion. Then we will be talking about double fertilization, which is in fact the exclusive kind of fertilization which occurs in the flowering plants or the angiosperms. And finally, we will discuss as to how it is significant. Alright, so we will be discussing fertilization events under these subtopics. Let us begin. So entry of pollen tube into ovule. The first topic that we are going to discuss is how the pollen tube is going to enter into the ovule. Now let me explain this to you with the help of a simple diagram. देखो ovule का जो structure है वो हम लोग already पढ़ चुके हैं. Alright, so if we take this as the general or basic structure of an ovule, तो ovule का ये end जो bulge end होता है nucellus से बनता है, that is called as the chalaza, right? And the apex here has a pore-like structure which is the micropylar end, and this pore is called the micropyle, right? Right? And we had also talked about the covering of the ovule which are in the form of integuments. Right? So we are going to be focusing on these three structures of the ovule when we talk about the entry of the pollen tube into the ovule. अब देखो यहाँ पे embryo sac develop हो रहा है. If you recap about the embryo sac, it has 8 nucleuses, right? 3 are on the antipodal Three are in the antipodal cells, which are present towards the chalazal side, right? Then there are three nucleuses which form the egg apparatus, two of which form the synergids and one forms the egg. The synergids have these kind of filiform apparatus in the form of small finger-like projections, and there are two nucleuses right in the middle, which are called as polar nuclei. They are present in the middle cell or the central cell, right? So this is the basic structure of an ovule that you had studied, right? Now we are going to study as to how the pollen tube enters. अब देखो तुम लोगों ने पिछले लेक्चर में ये पढ़ा था कि पोलन और पिस्टल का जो इंटरैक्शन होता है it is through chemicals, right? So the chemicals are going to drive or they are going to basically guide the entry of the pollen tube through the style, right? And then once it has moved through the style, it is going to enter into the ovule. अब तीन तरीके हो सकते हैं. पहला तरीका तो तुम लोग जानते हो, जो हम लोगों ने ऑलरेडी डिस्कस किया था, एंट्री थ्रू द माइक्रोपाइल. सो इफ द पोलन ट्यूब एंटर्स थ्रू द माइक्रोपाइल, carrying the male gametes, right? This type of entry is called as porogamy. Right? And porogamy is the most common kind of entry of the pollen tube which you are going to see in the angiosperms. Then the second kind of entry is from the chalazal side. So even though the pollen tube is entering from the chalazal side, obviously it has to reach the egg apparatus for fertilization to occur. So the pollen tube is going to enter through the chalazal side, but it will have to reach to the egg apparatus. So that is how it will enter. Right? And it will be carrying the two male gametes obviously along with it for fertilization to be accomplished. So this kind of entry from the chalazal side is called chalazogamy. Right? So porogamy from the pore side or the micropyle side, chalazogamy from the chalazal side. Now there is another kind of entry that can happen in certain plants like cucurbits. Cucurbits में ऐसी kind की entry होती है in which the pollen tube, it enters through the integuments. Again, it has to reach the egg apparatus, right? So it will enter through one of the integuments and then it will move further to reach the egg apparatus, again carrying the male gametes with it. And this kind of entry from the integuments, it is known as mesogamy. Alright, so the most common kind is the porogamy. Chalazogamy can occur in certain plants like betula में ये occur करता है. Example is in betula. Right? Whereas integuments वाला भी थोड़ा कम occur करता है. It occurs rarely and it is seen in cucurbits. Alright, so these are the three kinds when we talk about the entry of pollen tube into the ovule. I hope you have understood this. Now we are going to move on to the entry of the male gamete. अब देखो, once the pollen tube has entered, इन तीनों तरीके में से किसी से भी अगर enter करेगा ना, it has to reach the egg apparatus, right? When it reaches the egg apparatus, तो जो pollen grain होगा, what will be its form? See, जो हम लोगों ने pollen grain पढ़ा था, it had this outer layer which was known as the exine, then it had the inner layer which was called as the intine, and then it had two cells. There was a smaller cell, right, and a bigger cell. I hope you remember this, right? अब मैंने तुमसे उस टाइम भी बोला था कि पोलन ग्रेन या तो इस दो सेल स्टेज में शेड हो सकता है या फिर एक और स्टेज में शेड हो सकता है जब ये न्यूक्लियस है, इट हैज डिवाइडेड इनटू टू, राइट? सो इट कैन बी शेड एट दिस टू सेल स्टेज या फिर at the 3 cell stage, right, wherein This is the vegetative cell and the generative cell has divided into two, right? So it can be shed at either of these. However, these are the two male gametes. जो generative cell से दो cells बने हैं ना, they are carrying the male gametes. They have the male nucleuses, right? So obviously important है कि pollen tube, pollen grain जब synergids या egg apparatus तक पहुंचे तो वो इस 3 cell stage में हो, right? So if the pollen has been shed at the 2 cell stage, तो जब ये pollen tube की growth हो रही होगी ना, तभी ये generative cell divide कर जाएगा to form those 2 male gametes. और अगर pollen tube has already been shed in the 3 cell stage, तो उसके पास already ये 2 male gametes होंगे which will be transferred through the pollen grain. I hope this is clear to you. Now when these 2 male gametes they have reached to the end of the pollen tube और egg apparatus के बिल्कुल entry पर होते हैं, तो क्या होता है, the pollen tube its tip degenerate या burst कर जाती है, releasing the 2 male gametes to move into the synergids, right? So the 2 male gametes are going to move into the synergids through the filiform apparatus by the bursting of the pollen tube. So this is about the entry of the male gametes. It will move into the synergids by the bursting of the end of the pollen tube. I hope this is clear to you. Now we come to the most important event which is fertilization. यहाँ पे दो चीजें हम लोगों को ध्यान में रखनी है, Syngamy and Triple fusion. We are going to study them separately. Let us now begin with fertilization. अब जब हम लोग fertilization पढ़ेंगे ना, तो हम लोग फोकस करेंगे egg apparatus पे, क्योंकि यहीं पे actual fertilization के processes होंगे, right? So we are going to draw the embryo sac from its posterior end, जहाँ पे egg apparatus present है. Alright, so you people know that the egg apparatus is formed of 3 cells. तो एक हो जाता है egg cell, right? And then there are the 2 synergids, out of which I am drawing one. One is at the back, you can imagine that, right? So, and the synergids also have the filiform apparatus, which is finger-like projections, right? Alright, so here is the egg cell with the egg nucleus obviously, and here you have the synergid. Both of these synergids together with the egg cell is forming the egg apparatus. और ये जो central cell है उसमें तुमने पढ़ा था there are 2 polar nuclei, right? So here are the 2 polar nuclei which are present in the central cell, right? अब देखो होगा क्या, when the pollen tube it is going to enter into the micropyle, right? It is carrying the 3 cells, the vegetative cell and the 2 generative cell which are the male gametes, right? So here are the 2 male gametes that we are actually concerned about, as well as the vegetative cell. अब देखो vegetative cell का जो काम था ना, it was to guide the pollen tube into the style, through the style and then enter into the micropyle. It basically leads to the disintegration of parts of the style and then it finally guides it into the micropyle, right? तो अब vegetative cell का काम हो गया. जब काम हो गया है तो we no longer need it, right? So the vegetative cell is going to disintegrate right here, right? And then the pollen tube is going to burst from its tip, right? And the male gametes is going to enter into the synergids first. So here the pollen tube has disintegrated and the male gametes, they are going to enter into the synergids, right? Now, as the male gametes move through the synergids, one of the male gametes is going to go ahead and fuse with the egg nucleus. So, one of the gametes is going to go ahead and fuse with the egg nucleus here. Right? इस फ्यूजन को हम लोग बोलते हैं सिंगैमी. And what is the product of syngamy? It is the zygote. Right? The egg nucleus is going to fuse with the male gamete to form the zygote. इसका further development होगा into the embryo and finally it will lead to the development of the new plantlet. Right? Now, ये बात हो गई syngamy की. What about the second nucleus, second male gamete? अब देखो जैसे जैसे ये second male gamete move करती जाएगी ना, it will move through the synergids. This synergid is going to disintegrate, right? The egg apparatus as such will now only consist of the egg cell, whereas the two synergids have disintegrated, right? So they are going to disintegrate in this way, right? And this male gamete that you see here is going to go ahead and fuse with the two nuclei which are present here. And before this male gamete fuses with these two nuclei are in turn going to fuse. So these two polar nuclei are going to fuse. Right? So the polar nuclei will fuse. And the male gamete is also going to come and fuse with them. And this is in fact known as triple fusion. Triple fusion क्यों? क्योंकि दो polar nuclei और एक male gamete nuclei are fusing together. So this is called as triple fusion. And it leads to the development of a primary endosperm nucleus. Right? The primary endosperm nucleus, and this central cell in which this primary endosperm nucleus is formed is called the primary endosperm cell, right? What will this primary endosperm nucleus and primary endosperm cell form? It will later on form the endosperm, जो कि embryo के development में nutritive function perform करता है. It provides all the nutrient, all the nourishment that the embryo will now, or rather the zygote is going to need to develop into the embryo. So this is what happens during triple fusion, right? So अब हम लोग आ जाते हैं double fertilization पे. देखो ये जो double fertilization है, it is unique to flowering plants. और हम लोगों ने यहाँ पे देख भी लिया कि why it is called double fertilization. Because एक तो यहाँ पे fusion हो रहा है male gamete का egg nucleus के साथ, which is called as syngamy. और दूसरा fusion हो रहा है male gamete का polar nuclei के साथ, which is called as triple fusion. तो यहाँ पे डबल फर्टिलाइजेशन हो रहा है, डबल प्रोसेस ऑफ फ्यूजन हो रहा है, राइट? दिस डबल फर्टिलाइजेशन वाज इन फैक्ट डिस्कवर्ड बाय नवास्चिन in the flowering plants, and during double fusion he also discovered that there is formation of the diploid zygote, right? The egg nucleus is haploid, the male gamete is haploid, fusion leads to the development of diploid zygote. And there is also the development of a triploid endosperm. तो यहाँ पे polar nuclei जो थे, both of them were haploid. They fused together to form a diploid cell, right? Or rather a diploid nuclei. The male gamete here is again haploid. So 2n plus n here we get a triploid endosperm nucleus. So this is exactly what is double fertilization, and it is extremely unique to flowering plants or the angiosperms. I hope this is now clear to you why it is called double fertilization, right? So syngamy हो रहा है, triple fusion हो रहा है, because of which there is formation of two different tissues. There is formation of the zygote which will develop into the embryo, and there is formation of the primary endosperm nucleus which is going to develop into the endosperm. ठीक है, ये clear है? अब देखो significance क्या है double fertilization का. देखो पहली बात तो ये कि ये जो फीमेल सेल है, द एग सेल along with its cytoplasm, it is right here and it has to be fertilized, right? So first significance ये है कि जब मेल गैमीट इसको आके फर्टिलाइज करेगी तो मेल प्लांट के characteristics will come in the offspring, right? So the zygote is going to form the embryo and then the plantlet or the offspring, right? So it will also have the characteristic of the male, right? So syngamy की वजह से the male and the female characteristics combine, variations भी आ सकते हैं, right? Then the other significance is that यहाँ पे एक क्यू मिलता है ग्रोथ का, ठीक है? देखो जब ट्रिपल फ्यूजन होता है ना तो ये एंडोस्पर्म फॉर्म कर देता है. इनिशियली जब यहाँ पे एम्ब्रियो सैक डेवलप हो रहा था तो उसमें था न्यूसेलिस व्हिच वाज प्रोवाइडिंग द न्यूट्रिशन, राइट? लेकिन अब जाइगोट का एम्ब्रियो बनने के लिए जो न्यूट्रिशन प्रोवाइड होगा इट विल बी थ्रू दिस एंडोस्पर्म, राइट? सो जैसे ही ये ट्रिपल फ्यूजन होता है ना, इट इज अ क्यू कि ग्रोथ एंड मैच्योरेशन ऑफ द एम्ब्रियो हैज टू स्टार्ट. सो न्यूसेलिस से जो भी न्यूट्रिशन लिया जा रहा था उसका विड्रॉल होगा, it will stop, and the embryo is now going to depend on the endosperm for its nourishment and nutrition as well as growth and maturation, right? So then again triple fusion provides a cue for shifting the nourishment from nucellus to the endosperm, right? तो दूसरा significance, I hope this is clear. अब देखो तीसरा significance is related to syngamy. इस प्रोसेस में जो डबल फर्टिलाइजेशन प्रोसेस है इट इंश्योर्स कि जब तक जाइगोट फॉर्म नहीं हुआ है तब तक उसका न्यूट्रिटिव टिश्यू फॉर्म ना हो. जब तक सिंगैमी या फर्टिलाइजेशन नहीं होगा एग का तब तक एंडोस्पर्म फॉर्म नहीं होगा, राइट? सो वंस द जाइगोट हैज ऑलरेडी फॉर्म देन द न्यूट्रिटिव टिश्यू इज गोइंग टू फॉर्म. So do you understand? There are cues for everything, for every growth and maturation, right? So it is indeed a very interesting and distinctive phenomena that we have just studied today about double fertilization. I hope this entire lecture is clear to you. Now we are going to go ahead and study about the post-fertilization development. क्या क्या develop होता है? You've already studied endosperm, zygote, तो इनका development हम लोग देखेंगे. But we'll do that in the next lecture. Till then, you have to revise all this and stay tuned. Thank you.